Captain Alina Reyes stood on the bridge of the ESS Horizon, Earth's most advanced deep space research vessel. The ship had been exploring the outer reaches of the Andromeda Galaxy for the past 3 years, searching for signs of extraterrestrial life. Today, that search might finally bear fruit. "Captain, we're picking up an artificial signal," reported Lieutenant Commander Jay Park, the ship's communications officer. "It's unlike anything in our database." Alina's heart raced. "Can you pinpoint the source?" "Yes, ma'am. It's coming from a ship about 500,000 kilometers off our port bow." "On screen," Alina ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a massive vessel unlike any they had ever seen. It was roughly spherical, with a diameter of at least 2 kilometers. The surface was covered in intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Open a channel, all frequencies," Alina said, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. "This is Captain Alina Reyes of the Earth Science Ship Horizon. We come in peace and wish to establish communication." For several tense minutes, there was no response. Then suddenly, the bridge was filled with a series of clicks, whistles, and low-frequency rumbles. "Computer, analyze and attempt to translate," Alina ordered. "Working," the ship's AI responded. "Preliminary analysis suggests a complex language using both auditory and subsonic components. Translation will take time." Alina nodded. "Keep at it. In the meantime, let's try some universal gestures of goodwill." She pressed a button on her chair, activating the ship's external lights. The horizon began to flash its running lights in a rhythmic pattern, an old spacer's code for hello that had been used since the early days of human space exploration. To everyone's surprise, the alien ship responded almost immediately. Its swirling surface patterns began to pulse in a similar rhythm. "They're mimicking us," said Commander David Chen, the ship's first officer. "That's a good sign, right?" Alina allowed herself a small smile. "I hope so, David. Let's take it a step further." She motioned to Lieutenant Amira Rashid at the helm. "Amira, move us closer, nice and slow. Let's see how they react." The horizon inched forward. The alien vessel remained stationary, its pulsing patterns unchanging. "They're not backing away," Alina observed. "All right, let's try to establish visual contact. Jay, can you rig up some kind of basic pictographic message?" Lieutenant Commander Park nodded. "I think so, Captain. Give me a few minutes." While Jay worked, Alina turned to her science officer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka. "Yuki, what can you tell me about that ship?" Dr. Tanaka consulted her instruments. "It's remarkable, Captain. The hull material is like nothing we've ever encountered. It seems to be some kind of organic metallic hybrid. And the energy readings, they're off the charts, but in ways our sensors can barely comprehend." Alina whistled softly. "Sounds like we've got a lot to learn." "Captain," Jay called out, "I've prepared a simple pictographic message. It shows a basic representation of our ship and crew, along with some universal mathematical concepts to demonstrate our intelligence." "Send it," Alina ordered. The message was transmitted to the alien vessel. Minutes ticked by with no response. "Maybe they didn't understand," David suggested. Before Alina could respond, the view screen lit up with a new image. It showed a rough approximation of the alien ship, along with something else. "What are those?" Alina asked, squinting at the bizarre shapes accompanying the ship. Dr. Tanaka leaned in for a closer look. I think those might be the aliens themselves, Captain." The shapes were utterly alien, amorphous blobs with multiple appendages, constantly shifting and changing form. There was no clear indication of eyes, mouths, or any recognizable sensory organs. "Well," Alina said, trying to hide her shock, "they certainly don't look like us." As they watched, one of the alien shapes in the image seemed to extend a tendril towards the representation of the horizon. The tendril split into multiple smaller filaments, which then began to intertwine with parts of the human ship. "What do you think that means?" David asked. Dr. Tanaka's eyes widened. I believe they're suggesting some kind of physical contact or connection between our ships. Elena frowned. That seems a bit premature. We have no idea if our atmospheres are even compatible. She turned to Jai. Send another message. Show our crew in protective suits, meeting their representatives in a neutral space between our ships. Jay nodded and quickly composed the new pictograph. They sent it and waited. The response came faster this time. The alien image now showed their blob-like forms surrounded by what looked like bubbles, meeting human figures in spacesuits. I think we have an agreement, Elena said, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. All right, let's prepare for first contact. David, assemble a team. Full biohazard protocols. We'll use Shuttle Bay 2 as a quarantine zone. As the crew rushed to prepare, Elena couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The aliens were clearly intelligent and seemed peaceful, but their utterly foreign biology presented countless unknowns. How would they communicate? What if their very presence was somehow harmful to humans? And perhaps most importantly, how would they perceive humanity? Elena pushed these thoughts aside. They had trained for this moment for years. It was time to make history. Hours later, Elena stood in Shuttle Bay 2, encased in a state-of-the-art environmental suit. Beside her were David, Dr. Tanaka, and 2 security officers. They'd watched as a shimmering, translucent sphere about 3 meters in diameter materialized in the center of the bay. Inside the sphere, 3 of the alien beings took shape. Up close, they were even stranger than the images had suggested. Their bodies seemed to be in constant motion, shifting between solid, liquid, and gaseous states. Tendrils and appendages formed and dissolved as needed. Elena took a deep breath and stepped forward. Welcome to the ESS Horizon, she said, accompanying her words with slow, open-handed gestures. We are honored to meet you. The aliens responded with a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and rumbles. One of them extended a tendril, which split into dozens of hair-thin filaments. The filaments began to dance in complex patterns in the air between them. Fascinating, Dr. Tanaka whispered. I think they're trying to communicate visually as well as audibly. Elena nodded, her mind racing. First contact was always expected to be challenging, but this was beyond anything they had imagined. As she watched the aliens' hypnotic display, she realized that bridging the gap between their species would require more than just technology or linguistics. It would take creativity, patience, and an entirely new way of thinking. The adventure had only just begun. Cultural exchange. The next few weeks aboard the ESS Horizon were a whirlwind of activity. After the initial contact, both humans and the aliens, who called themselves the Zorn, had agreed to a cultural exchange program. A small delegation from each species would spend time on the other ship, learning about their biology, technology, and culture. Dr. Yuki Tanaka led the human team aboard the Zorn vessel, which they had learned was called the Nebula Weaver. As she floated through the ship's cavernous interior, she marveled at its organic architecture. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and corridors seemed to form and dissolve as needed. This is incredible, Yuki murmured into her suit's recorder. The entire ship seems to be a living organism, adapting to the needs of its inhabitants. Her Zorn guide, a being they had dubbed Swirl, due to its constantly swirling surface patterns, emitted a series of clicks and rumbles. The translation device on Yuki's suit interpreted, "We are pleased you find our home interesting. Your own vessel fascinates us as well. So rigid, yet so complex." Yuki smiled behind her helmet. "I suppose it would seem quite strange to you. We've always built our technology as separate from ourselves." Swirl's body rippled in what Yuki had come to recognize as their equivalent of a nod. "Indeed, we find it difficult to understand how you function with such limited adaptability." Meanwhile, aboard the Horizon, Captain Alina Rice was facing her own challenges with the Zorn delegation. The aliens were intensely curious about every aspect of the ship, but their method of investigation was causing some issues. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander J. Park called out, his voice strained. "The Zorn in engineering are trying to interface directly with our computer systems again. They don't seem to understand why we're not comfortable with this." Elena sighed. This had been an ongoing problem. The Zorn, used to merging with their own technology, saw no issue with physically connecting to the Horizon systems. They couldn't grasp the concepts of privacy or data security as humans understood them. "I'll be right there," Elena replied, making her way to engineering. She found two Zorn, their tendrils extended and intertwined with various control panels. Engineer Maria Santos stood nearby, looking both fascinated and horrified. "Esteemed guests," Elena said, addressing the Zorn, "while we appreciate your curiosity, we must ask again that you refrain from directly connecting to our systems. It's potentially dangerous for both you and us." The Zorn retracted their tendrils, their bodies undulating in patterns that the translation devices interpreted as confusion and slight frustration. "We do not understand," one of them communicated. "How can you truly know a system without becoming one with it? Your method of interface is so limited." Elena struggled to find the right words. "Our technology is designed to be operated, not merged with. We value the distinction between organic life and artificial systems." The Zorn's patterns shifted again, this time indicating something like pity. "How lonely that must be," the translator rendered their response. As the cultural exchange continued, more differences emerged. The Zorn were baffled by human eating habits, having no concept of solid food. They absorbed energy and nutrients directly from their environment. Human sleep cycles were equally perplexing to them, as the Zorn had no equivalent to sleep, existing in a constant state of awareness. On the flip side, the human team on the Nebula Weaver was struggling with the Zorn's fluid concept of identity. The aliens could merge with each other, sharing memories and experiences, before separating again. This made it challenging for the humans to keep track of who was who, and raised complex questions about individuality and consciousness. Despite these challenges, both sides were learning a great deal. The Zorn's ability to manipulate matter at a molecular level had revolutionary implications for human medicine and manufacturing. In turn, human art and music opened up entirely new realms of sensory experience for the Zorn. As the third week of the exchange neared its end, Elena called a meeting with her senior staff and the lead Zorn delegate, a being they had named Flux, due to its rapidly changing form. "I think we can all agree that this exchange has been enlightening," Elena began. "But I'm concerned about the number of misunderstandings and near accidents we've had. Are we moving too fast?" Dr. Tanaka shook her head. "With all due respect, Captain, I think we need to push through these difficulties. The potential benefits of cooperation between our species are too great to ignore." Flux's body shimmered in agreement. "We share this sentiment. Though your ways are strange to us, we sense great potential in our collaboration." Commander Chen raised a hand. "I agree the benefits could be enormous, but we need to establish clearer protocols. We can't have the Zorn accidentally accessing sensitive systems, and we need to ensure our team on the Nebula Weaver doesn't inadvertently cause offense." Elena nodded. "Agreed. Flux, would your people be open to establishing some mutual guidelines for interaction?" Flux's form rippled in a way that the humans had learned to interpret as thoughtful consideration. "This concept is unfamiliar, but we are willing to explore it. Perhaps this could be an opportunity for mutual growth." As the meeting continued, discussing potential guidelines and areas for further collaboration, none of them could have anticipated the crisis that was about to bring their fledgling alliance to the ultimate test. In the vastness of space beyond their ships, something was stirring. The threat that would force humans and Zorn to overcome their differences or face annihilation together. The cultural exchange was about to become a fight for survival. External threat. The alarms blared throughout both the ESS Horizon and the Nebula Weaver, their discordant tones a jarring reminder of the danger rapidly approaching. Captain Elena Reyes rushed to the bridge, her mind racing with possibilities. "Report," she barked as she entered. Lieutenant Commander J. Park responded immediately, his usually calm demeanor visibly shaken. "Captain, we've detected multiple unknown vessels entering the system. They're not responding to hails and are on an intercept course." Alina's eyes narrowed. "How many?" "7, Mom. And they're big. Each one is at least twice the size of the horizon." "Weapons?" Jay shook his head. "Unknown, but given their aggressive approach, we have to assume they're hostile." Elena nodded grimly. "Alert the Zorn. We need to coordinate our response." As if on cue, the main view screen flickered to life, revealing the undulating form of Flux, the lead Zorn delegate. "Captain Reyes," the translator rendered Flux's pulsating patterns. "We detect the approaching vessels. This is most concerning." "Agreed," Elena replied. "What can you tell us about them? Have you encountered this species before?" Flux's form shimmered in what Elena had learned to interpret as negation. "We have not. Their energy signatures are unlike anything in our records." Elena frowned. This was bad. Not only were they facing an unknown threat, but even the Zorn, with their vastly different evolutionary background, had no knowledge of these newcomers. "We need to buy time," Elena said, her tactical mind kicking into gear. "Flux, can the Nebula Weaver generate any kind of energy field to mask our presence?" Flux's body rippled in consideration. "We can modulate our bioluminescent patterns to create a camouflage effect. It may confuse their sensors briefly." "Do it," Elena ordered. She turned to her helm officer. "Amira, prepare for evasive maneuvers. We'll use the Nebula Weaver's camouflage to cover our initial retreat." As the crew rushed to execute her orders, Elena couldn't help but marvel at how quickly humans and Zorn had begun working together in the face of a common threat. Just weeks ago, they had struggled to understand each other's most basic functions. Now they were coordinating battle strategies. The horizon shuddered as the first volley from the unknown ships reached them. Elena gripped her chair, her knuckles white. "Report. Direct hit to our aft shields." Jay called out. "They're down to 60%. Return fire." Elena ordered. "Target their lead ship's propulsion systems." The horizon's phasers lanced out, striking the massive alien vessel. To everyone's shock, the beams seemed to have no effect. "No damage detected," Jay reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. On the view screen, Elena watched as the Nebula Weaver twisted and writhed, its surface erupting in a dazzling display of bioluminescence. The effect was mesmerizing, and for a moment, the incoming fire from the alien ships became erratic. "It's working," Amira exclaimed. Their targeting systems seemed confused. Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Good work, Flux. Now, let's see if we can." Her words were cut short as a brilliant beam of energy sliced through space, narrowly missing the horizon but scoring a direct hit on the Nebula Weaver. The Zorn ship's outer membrane rippled violently, and Elena could hear the distressed clicks and whistles of the Zorn crew through the open comm channel. "Flux," Elena called out. "Status." There was a moment of terrifying silence before Flux's translated voice came through, strained but alive. "We survive, but our defenses are severely compromised. We cannot withstand another such attack." Elena's mind raced. Their weapons were ineffective, their shields were failing, and they were vastly outnumbered. She needed a plan, and fast. "Dr. Tanaka," she called out to her science officer, who had been furiously analyzing data since the attack began. "Tell me you have something." Yuki looked up from her console, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "Captain, I've been studying the energy signatures of their weapons. There's something odd about them. They seem to be operating on a quantum entanglement principle that I've only seen theorized." "What does that mean for us?" Elena pressed. "It means," Yuki said, her voice gaining confidence, "that if we can disrupt the entanglement, we might be able to render their weapons useless." Elena nodded. "How do we do that?" Yuki hesitated. That's the tricky part. We'd need to generate a massive burst of tachyon particles, more than our engines can produce. Elena's eyes darted to the view screen, where the Nebula Weaver was still visible, its bioluminescent patterns now erratic and dim. An idea began to form. "What about the Zorn?" she asked. "Their ship manipulates energy in ways we barely understand. Could they generate the tachyon burst?" Yuki's eyes widened in realization. Possibly, but it would require them to essentially convert their entire ship into one massive tachyon emitter. The process would be devastating for them. Elena closed her eyes, the weight of command bearing down on her. She was about to ask allies they barely knew to potentially sacrifice themselves for a plan that might not even work. "Open a channel to Flux," she said quietly. As Flux's translated voice filled the bridge, Elena took a deep breath. "Flux, I have a plan. But I need to ask something terrible of you and your people." The fate of both their species now hung in the balance, as Elena prepared to propose a desperate gambit that would either save them all or doom them to destruction. Adaptation and cooperation. Flux's form rippled with an intensity Elena had never seen before as she finished explaining her desperate plan. The bridge of the horizon fell silent, all eyes fixed on the view screen, waiting for the Zorn's response. "You ask much, Captain Reyes." Flux's translated voice finally came through, tinged with a mix of fear and resolve. "To reconfigure our entire being, to potentially sacrifice our ship and ourselves. It is not a decision I can make lightly." Elena nodded solemnly. "I understand, Flux, but we're running out of options and time." As if to emphasize her point, another barrage from the alien ships rocked both vessels. Alarms blared as systems failed across both ships. "Shields down to 20%, Jai shouted over the cacophony. "We can't take much more of this." Flux's form pulsed rapidly, communicating with the other Zorn. After what felt like an eternity but was merely seconds, Flux spoke again. "We will do it. For the sake of both our species, we will attempt this." Elena felt a wave of relief and guilt wash over her. "Thank you, Flux. Dr. Tanaka will transmit the specifications for the tachyon burst. We'll do everything we can to protect you while you make the conversion." As Yuki began frantically sending data to the Nebula Weaver, Elena turned to her tactical officer. "Focus all remaining weapons on protecting the Zorn ship. We need to buy them time." The next few minutes were chaos. The horizon darted and weaved through space, drawing fire away from the Nebula Weaver, while returning volleys of its own. On the view screen, Elena watched in awe as the Zorn ship began to change. The Nebula Weaver's fluid form started to crystallize, its organic structure aligning into precise geometric patterns. Brilliant pulses of energy rippled across its surface, growing in intensity with each passing moment. "Captain," Yuki called out, her voice filled with wonder. "The Zorn are doing something incredible. They're not just reconfiguring their ship, they're altering their very molecular structure to channel the tachyon particles." Elena marveled at the Zorn's adaptability. In the face of destruction, they were pushing the boundaries of their own biology in ways she could scarcely comprehend. "Incoming." Jay's shout snapped Elena back to the dire reality of their situation. A massive energy beam from the lead alien ship was heading straight for the transforming Nebula Weaver. "Intercept course," Elena ordered without hesitation. "Put us between them and that beam." The horizon lurched as Amira executed a hard turn, placing the human ship directly in the path of the devastating attack. The impact was catastrophic. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7. Someone shouted amidst the chaos of exploding consoles and billowing smoke. Elena gripped her chair, fighting to stay conscious as the ship bucked violently. Through blurred vision, she saw the Nebula Weaver on the view screen, still intact, still changing. "Status of the Zorn ship," she managed to croak out. They're ready, Captain," Yuki exclaimed, her voice a mix of pain and excitement. "The tachyon matrix is charged." Elena straightened in her chair, ignoring the blood trickling down her forehead. Flux, now. Release the burst. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then suddenly, the Nebula Weaver erupted in a blinding flash of light. A wave of invisible energy pulsed outward, washing over the horizon and continuing on to engulf the alien ships. As the light faded, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. Elena held her breath, watching the alien ships intently. "Their weapons," Jay said in disbelief. "They're powering down." It worked. A cheer went up across the bridge, quickly stifled as Elena raised her hand. "What about the Nebula Weaver? Flux, do you read me?" There was no response from the Zorn ship, which now hung motionless in space, its once vibrant surface dull and lifeless. "Life signs?" Elena asked, dreading the answer. Yuki shook her head, her expression grim. "I'm not detecting any, Captain." "But wait." Her console beeped urgently. "There's something. It's faint, but I'm picking up traces of Zorn energy signatures. They're scattered throughout the ship, but they're there." Hope surged through Elena. "Can we beam them aboard?" "Not with our transporters," Yuki replied. "Their molecular structure is too unstable after the conversion." "But," she paused, an idea forming, "maybe we don't have to." Elena leaned forward. "Explain." "The Zorn exist as energy beings now," Yuki said, her words coming faster as she worked through the concept. "If we can create a containment field to house their energy matrix, we might be able to preserve them until they can reconstitute their physical forms." Elena nodded. "Do it. Use whatever resources you need." As Yuki rushed off to implement her plan, Elena turned her attention back to the disabled alien ships. "Hail them," she ordered. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a bizarre, multi-limbed creature that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. Its voice, when it came through the translator, was a discordant mix of tones. "You have disabled us," it said, sounding more confused than angry. "How?" Elena stood, drawing herself up to her full height despite the pain coursing through her body. "We are the combined forces of humanity and the Zorn. We've demonstrated our ability to neutralize your weapons. Are you prepared to negotiate a peaceful resolution, or shall we finish what we've started?" The alien commander's form rippled in what Elena hoped was consideration rather than rage. After a long moment, it spoke again. "We will negotiate." As the adrenaline of battle began to fade, Elena allowed herself a small smile. They had survived, against all odds. But the real challenge was just beginning. They had a hostile alien force to pacify, Zorn allies to save, and the foundations of an interstellar alliance to build. The adventure, it seemed, was far from over. Victory and understanding. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity aboard the ESS Horizon. As the ship limped through space, its crew worked tirelessly on 3 fronts, repairing their own extensive damage, negotiating with the now docile alien force they had come to know as the Shifters, and most crucially, finding a way to restore their Zorn allies. In the newly created containment bay, Dr. Yuki Tanaka hunched over her console, dark circles under her eyes, testament to the long hours she'd been working. The room hummed with energy, shimmering fields housing the ethereal forms of the Zorn. "How's it going, Yuki?" Captain Elena Reyes asked as she entered the bay, her own face showing signs of exhaustion and healing injuries. Yuki looked up, a mix of frustration and hope in her eyes. "We're making progress, but it's slow. The Zorn's molecular structure is incredibly complex. Every time we think we've figured out how to stabilize one aspect, another shifts." Elena nodded, gazing at the swirling energy patterns that were once their allies. "And flux, still the strongest signal," Yuki replied, gesturing to a particularly bright concentration of energy. I think they're trying to communicate with us, but we haven't cracked the code yet." As if on cue, the energy field containing flux pulsed brightly. Yuki's console beeped urgently. "Wait," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. I'm getting something. It's a pattern. Mathematical. Like the one we used when we first made contact. Elena leaned in, watching as complex equations scrolled across the screen. Can you interpret it? Yuki's eyes widened. They're giving us instructions for how to rebuild their physical forms. A surge of hope ran through Elena. Can we do it? With this? Yes, I think we can, Yuki said, her excitement building. But we'll need help. This goes beyond just biology or physics. We need to combine disciplines in ways we've never done before. Elena nodded firmly. You'll have whatever you need. Pull in anyone from any department who can help. This is our top priority. Over the next few days, the containment bay became a hive of activity. Scientists, engineers, and even some of the more scientifically inclined shifter delegates worked around the clock, following the intricate instructions provided by Flux. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of trial and error, breakthroughs and setbacks, Yuki approached Elena with news. We're ready for the first attempt, she said, her voice a mix of exhaustion and nervous excitement. Elena followed her to a specially prepared chamber where a swirling mass of energy, Flux, hovered within a complex array of equipment. Here goes nothing, Yuki muttered, initiating the sequence. The chamber filled with a brilliant light as energy crackled and swirled. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a form began to take shape within the maelstrom. As the light faded, Elena gasped. There in the chamber was Flux, but not as they had known them before. The Zorn's form was now a mesmerizing blend of their original fluid state and crystalline structures, pulsing with an inner light that seemed to shift between dimensions. Flux, Elena called out hesitantly. The being's surface rippled, and a familiar series of clicks and whistles emanated from it. The translator sprang to life. Captain Reyes, it is good to see you again. Elena laughed, tears of relief and joy in her eyes. It's good to see you too, Flux. How do you feel? Change, came the reply. We are. More than we were. The experience has transformed us in ways we are still understanding. Over the next few weeks, the rest of the Zorn were successfully reconstituted. Each emerged changed, their forms and abilities enhanced by their brush with pure energy states. As the Zorn recovered, negotiations with the shifters progressed. It turned out that the attack had been a tragic misunderstanding. The shifters, with their constantly changing form, had interpreted the humans' rigid bodies and the Zorn's fluid ones as signs of an unnatural alliance that threatened the balance of life as they understood it. With the Zorn's new forms serving as a bridge between human and shifter biology, understanding began to grow between all three species. The shifters, humbled by their defeat and intrigued by the diversity they now encountered, became eager partners in fostering interstellar peace. Months after the fateful battle, representatives from Earth, the Zorn homeworld, and the Shifter Collective gathered on the observation deck of the fully repaired ESS Horizon. Elena stood before them, Flux undulating beside her, as she prepared to sign the treaty that would form the foundation of their new alliance. Today, Elena began, her voice carrying across the assembled delegates. We stand at the dawn of a new era. An era where the differences between us are not sources of fear or conflict, but wellsprings of strength and innovation. She gestured to the stars visible through the vast window behind her. Out there, the universe holds wonders and challenges beyond our imagination. But together, humans, Zorn, and shifters, we are now better equipped than ever to face them. As Elena signed the treaty, followed by Flux leaving their unique energy signature and the shifter representative morphing their appendage into the agreed-upon seal, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a tentative cultural exchange had evolved, through crisis and cooperation, into something far greater. They had not only survived but had forged a bond that transcended the boundaries of biology and culture. As the assembled delegates cheered and the Horizon's engines hummed to life, preparing to embark on their next mission, Elena knew that this was just the beginning. The unlikely alliance had proven itself in the crucible of conflict, and now, united, they were ready to face whatever the vast, mysterious universe had in store for them. The adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning.